Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Hidden Hockey Podcast. Again, my name's Matt Gordon. For those that have never tuned in before, if you're watching this, I'm recording. If you're on YouTube and you're happen to be watching, again, my name's Matt Gordon. Obviously, a big avid hockey fan, big draft prospect guy, and also a big international hockey guy. So before we get started today, obviously, last night we had a lot of different games going on with Sweden and Finland, as well as the U.S.-Canada game during the Four Nations tournament this week. Obviously, the Four Nations, my thoughts and opinions on it are that, this is obviously Bettman's way to avoid the Olympics and actually not play best on best. To me, I think best on best, as far as my definition goes, is, not just including just U.S., Canada, Sweden, and Finland. It's including the Czechs. It's including the Slovaks. It's including the Germans, the Swiss. I mean, you could have, 12 different nations in this tournament and have it really be a true best on best. And that can be done through the Olympics. So in my opinion, I think that is where the bread and butter should be for international hockey. And it's sad that, paying players insurance is the main reason why Bettman won't allow for players to play in the Olympics. It's kind of sad considering it's one of the biggest sporting venues across international sports as well as international hockey. So it's a shame that that's the case, but just want to have that little anecdote in there before I talk about today, the future of hockey here in the 2026 and the 2027 NHL mock drafts that I have today. I only did a top 16 ranking for both classes just because those are, it's really hard to declare kids first rounders. I won't even declare these kids first rounders right now just because I have them as a 16 rank, but I wouldn't consider them to be lock-in things. Obviously, the usual candidates that have been talked about and bandied about already in the scouting community is obviously going to stay the same. But where those will obviously be candidates that are fairly obvious to those that are watching here, especially if you're an avid fan. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about some other prospects that I think are going to be some really high-end talents. Some that I've personally seen and watched, as well as some candidates to really watch out for here in the coming future. So without further ado, if you have any questions, obviously as you're watching, or if you're watching on recording, please leave those comments here on the right hand side. Greatly appreciate those that want to engage in the prospect stuff. I mean, we've grown this page to over 200 subscribers now, so I'd love to be able to keep those people engaged and keep those people constantly commenting on here. And if you are willing to collaborate or want to collaborate in any sort of way, please do so. We'd love to jump on some other podcasts or some other YouTube channels talking about the draft and really getting into the nitty gritty of the year so far this year. So without further ado, I'm going to get into my early mock for the 2026 NHL mock draft. So I'm going to share that screen right now and get into kind of my thoughts on each one of the prospects here. So you can see on here, I got the prospects loaded up on here. Obviously, number one for me, far and away, I think he's the best available prospect right now, not in the NHL. It's Gavin McKenna. Gavin McKenna is somebody who I've had on my radar since he was 10, 11 years old. Obviously, was really impressive, playing in the UConn, and obviously had to step down and by the time he was 12, 13, had to play in the CSSHL and, was playing at the U15 level and dominating. And, he's just continuing to show exactly why he is an exceptional prospect. You look at the game, you look at the skill set. I don't think you can compare him fairly to a McDavid, but I think he's got that kind of impact on a game. Really good straight line skater. Really like his overall push and what he brings to the table. An incredible playmaker. I think him and Bedard are two of the best playmakers I've ever seen at 16 years old. And that's including McDavid as well. I mean, those three are just a class above. I think you look at what he's been able to do in the clutch moments. He goes to tournaments and he dominates. He's already dominated the U18s. Already got his chance to play at the World Juniors this year and really didn't look that out of place. He's going to obviously be a major impact player in next year's World Junior class, World Junior Championship, as a 16-year-old as a 17-year-old. He's going to be just a phenomenal player. Obviously, he's already 6 foot and about 170 pounds. You see what he's doing at the Western Hockey League level. I would anticipate in his draft year, he's going to be closer to, probably 140, 150 points in his draft year just because of his sheer will and dominance. in the league, and being able to obviously be a really incredible prospect in his own right. He's a late born 07, but he's basically 10 days away from being an 08. Just a kid who I have all the time in the world for. There's no weaknesses in his game. Very strong defensively, very good offensively. Good skater, has everything you could want, and then some in a prospect. This is a future superstar in the league. I see 100 points in the NHL in his future. I'm really bullish on Gavin McKenna, and obviously that's why I have him here at number 1. The second and third picks here, they're pretty interchangeable to me, but Ethan Belchet's playing for Windsor right now in the OHL. This is a kid he's an absolute massive human being, 6'6", 230 pounds, is a 17-year-old. Really has come into the OHL and made it his own. Been a key factor for the Windsor Spitfires throughout their season. This is just a relentless forechecking kid. He's clearly a man amongst boys already. Obviously already has the NHL build. It's just a matter of getting his skills to the right, mindset and different things like that. But he's got a great offensive game. Skating could use a little bit of work. I think he's still really good for his size, but he might need to be an above average skater in order to make a super big impact and reach his full potential in the National Hockey League. He just continues to really change the game in terms of, looking at these bigger guys that, we look at the guys like Quentin Byfield who stepped into the OHL. He's even bigger than Quentin. Arguably has had just as good, if not a little bit better of an offensive impact so far, looking comparatively at their careers. He just has a different style game than most do in the Ontario Hockey League. A little bit of a throwback style player. He just brings it every game, and definitely a leadership guy. Definitely somebody who will be shooting up scouts' radars in the not so distant future. If he's not already slated as a top 3 pick, I think it's a foregone conclusion that he will be in this draft here. The only thing would be, some sort of character issue with him, not being able to follow through on certain things. It's just, he would really have to have some sort of major issue in order for him to not be a top 3 pick in that draft. Going into the third pick here, we'll talk about Viggo Bjork, a kid from Djurgårdens, just got his debut in the Allsvenskan the other day. He got his first pro goal. Obviously, this is a kid who's already got a pro mindset. Really elusive player. I think he's got one of the better shots in this draft in terms of the ones that I've seen so far. Just really offensively creative. He's breaking, broke records at the U18 level. Has played really well at the U20 level, being a 17-year-old, and just finding his game and his opportunities out there. Right, like he just has a definitive game. Somebody who has a really good finishing ability. I haven't really seen a guy who finishes like him since Alex Holtz, in terms of guys that come from Sweden and have that similar mindset. I think he has more upside than Alex Holtz did. But looking at him, they're very comparable players. Skating is pretty good from Viggo. I think there's still more work there too as well. But obviously he's 16 years old. There's still some more work in general over their games. And, Viggo to me is a guy who obviously if he's found to be ready to play at the pro level, he's advanced in ways that, Djurgårdens is really impressed with, and it's a really good development opportunity for him there. I would fully expect him to play in the World Juniors next year and play for Sweden. And it just depends on, the depth of the players that are going in here. But they have the 07 class, I think, for Sweden is actually considerably strong. So I think there's going to be a few guys taking over spots there. And I think him and another guy I'm going to get into the list here, I think they're going to have outside shots too. At the very least, they're both going to play at the U18s. But both of them also, I think, have a shot to play the World Juniors as well. Going into Keaton Verhoff now at 4. This kid is shot up radars for a lot of scouts. A really good player, obviously, in the CSSHL. But, to me, he's far and away the best defenseman in this class. Just a really big player. He's already 6'4", 210 pounds. Really good skater. Actually, an unbelievable skater. He's very elite. Really good accelerator, despite his size. Really good at shifting and managing the point as well as, really keeping really good gaps in lanes in the defensive zone. I've never seen him really beat to the outside ever. Usually if you're beating him, it's he made an unbelievable move to get into the inside. And by that time, you might have another really adept defender closing in on you in the NHL. So, he finds his grooves and finds his opportunities. He's able to already be a really impact player at the Western Hockey League level, and he's already a key factor for Victoria. In watching him, obviously I've watched Cole Reshny and for this draft year, and they got a really good team in Victoria. I think they're going to be a group that continues to grow here, and I think they have a real shot next year being a decent contender in the Western Hockey League. So he's going to get some really good draft eligible experiences. But just an unbelievable player to watch. I think the skill set is through the roof. There's so much upside with him. Just need to see it realized. And I think a good development coach will be able to pull that out of him. Number 5 here, Elton Hermanson. Playing for a program outside of the pure dominant ones in Orebro. This is a guy who I think is just all around a really good player. You look at him, and I look at him very similarly to, like a Victor Arvidsson, but with more offensive upside. A decent skater, really good forechecker. Offensive game maybe needs a little bit more rounding, but he's been very impressive so far at the under 20 level in the Super Elite League. He's just one of the better 08s in this class. I think him and Vigo have been 1-2 for at least the last 2 years for the 08s out of Sweden. Just finding his groove and finding his way into junior hockey. And I think he might find himself some pro games at the end of next year. Just really, has a really pro-ready style game as it is already, really defensively responsible as well. He's going to find his opportunities here in Sweden, and obviously being in such a defensively, adept and skilled environment, he's going to become a very well-rounded player. And I think, the National Hockey League isn't too far away for him. I think he could be a guy that, once 2026 rolls around, if his game rounds out enough, he might be able to, maybe get into the AHL or the National Hockey League before the age of 20. I think there's a really good overall skill set and game. Really rounds it off for me. And, I think in terms of his upside, he's one of the higher end guys in this class too. Looking at Verhoff and Hermanson, I actually thought about putting him in that orange tier. But to me, I think Belchetz and Bjork both have very elite skill sets that separate them from the rest of the guys in the group. But honestly, anybody from 2 through 8 to me are guys that might even, have their opportunity to see some NHL time. I think Gavin McKenna, there's no question. He'll jump right into the NHL out right after he's drafted. Going into number 6 here, we got Mikey Burchild. To me, he's been the most impressive guy in the development program across both age groups. This is a guy who's, again, super well-rounded. I think his skating really allows him to find his game. And, he can score a little more. I think there's some warts in his game he's still got to work through. But, looking at the general highs that he has in his games, I find him to always be at least doing something out there. I think he is very productive, regardless of whether he's scoring goals, regardless of whether he's setting up plays. He's really good on forechecks. You can put him out on the penalty kill, and I think he's very impressive as well. Obviously, he's gotten his experience playing on the prep team at Shattuck St. Mary before coming to the national development program. But this is a kid who I have a lot of time for. I think he's a really, really talented player. He's going to get some U18 time, I think, this year as well. Might even make the U18 roster. It just depends on, what guys can play and what guys can't. But I think he's got a legit shot of the U17s to really jump up in that play and, find his opportunities there. To me, I think there's just some more to work on in his game. But, I have him ranked here purely on his upside. I think his overall game probably puts him closer to 10 to 15 in my opinion. But he brings it. He brings it every game. And, I think looking at the totality of what he can bring to a game, if he can round out every portion of his game, I think there's a lot to like here with Mikey Burchild. Number 7 here, Brady Wasselin, OHL player for Niagara. Niagara, him and, the two-headed monster with him and Ryan Rubrick. I don't have Ryan here in the top 16, but I'll get into that in a little bit. But Brady Wasselin is, looking at this kid, he's such a powerful skater. I look at his skating, and I think Jack Eichel, in terms of how demonstrative his strides are. I think he's, super, super detailed in his game too. I think his defensive game could use a little bit of work here. But there's a lot to like within his overall skill set and his game. A little bit of a rougher around the edges guy, but bringing a lot of skill too. I think his skill is actually very underrated in the public sphere. I think there's just a lot that you can see in his game that is, really impressive to watch. I think he's been dominant at the youth levels, and obviously in the OHL this year, he's found his groove. I think next year is going to be more of his breakout year, but in terms of what he's done at the OHL level, being only 16 years old, a lot of kids are just adjusting to the league. He's found his groove in an environment that has actually technically been really very toxic in the last few years. So one of the development organizations that I think a lot of people want to have their prospects away from. But for him to still be succeeding and actually thriving speaks a lot to how good he is as a player, as well as, his overall mindset and what he's capable of handling and managing. I made a mistake by saying Ryan wasn't on here. I debated not having him on here. He's at 9, but I'm going to talk about Alessandro Di Orio first. He's another kid from Sarnia. Di Orio, again, had a really dominant GTHL career. Was able to be very impactful at that level. Comes into Sarnia this year. I think hasn't really had the offensive pop I was expecting. But at the very least, he's been a really impressive player in terms of, still being a very offensively creative player, still being able to do the right things and the little things in the growth in his game. And, having seen him a couple of times, not necessarily this year, but at the GTHL level, I think there's times where he will take a game and he will control the game. And it's not necessarily due to skill. It's just due to his smarts and his IQ. I would like to see that from him in the OHL level. Obviously, that takes time to develop, which is why I don't think the production has been there as much as most would have expected. But I think there is a lot to like within his game. And I think, to me, at the very least, he's going to be a first-round pick in this year. Barring that he just is able to trend at the level that he's been trending at throughout his career. Number 9, Ryan Rubrick. This is a kid who at his high end, he's in the top of this list, no question. I think he's right up there with Gavin when he's playing really well. But watching and being – I just – every viewing I get of him, he's very inconsistent. I get, some viewings where he's the best player on the ice and he's extremely dominant, gets a 4-point game. It is absolutely lights out. And then I'll watch him and he'll just fade into obscurity for some games. I look at, obviously being a Wings fan, I grew up and watched Johan Franzen. I think Ryan Rubrick is got that kind of game. Really dominant player, good straight line skater. The shot's really impressive. I think he's a better playmaker than Franzen ever was, but Ryan, to me, I think has a lot of work to be done in terms of making himself more impactful. I don't think he forechecks as well as he should for the size he is. Needs to find his overall game a lot more. But when you get the upside and you get the really high-end flashes of skill and talent, I mentioned him already in the stream already, but Quinn Byfield, to me, had those same moments in the OHL. Somebody who was really dominant at the minor midget level and then comes into the OHL and is struggling to find that dominant streak that he had before. There's just a lot to look into with him. I think there's, obviously this year he's come in and he's, 73 points in 51 games. And that's pretty unbelievable for somebody, the year before their draft eligibility. But I just need to see more from him in a consistency perspective. I think, the production is always going to be there. He's just a really gifted scorer. And obviously he was really relied upon in Niagara, but I need to see more from him in order for me to feel really confident putting him in my top 5. I really want to put him in my top 5 for this year in 26, but obviously the next 12 to 18 months are going to really determine where he ranks. Is he going to fall into that top 2 or 3? Is he going to fit in at 5 through 8, or is he going to sit where I have him right now at anywhere from like 9 to 15? I think at his bare minimum, he's going to be at 15, 13, somewhere in that range. But at his very highest, I think he could be the second or third best player this year for 2026. So he's going to be a very polarizing player to watch, in my opinion, going into next year. Mathis Preston is closing out the top 10 here. Mathis is a guy who is a really gifted offensive player. He tends to, obviously, every tournament he's ever played in, he's been super dominant in. I think he, at the WHL level this year, he's found his game quite a bit. I think there's still some more rounding in terms of what he can do. Just shy of a point per game right now. I think 16 goals and 20 assists in 42 games, which is really impressive at the Western Hockey League level. But obviously, he's had a couple years now to develop. He's had that extra year to grow into his game. I think next year is going to be the year where his game finds that next level. Playing in Spokane, really good development environment for him, so he can, obviously be under the tutelage of some really impressive people that have developed really good talents. Obviously, you look at what he's been able to do in terms of his game. I think his shot still has some more work. He scored a lot of goals when he was younger from just being really elusive and really skillful. But finding in his game, he needs to look at himself and look at how he scored goals in the past, and maybe find new and creative ways to score. I think he is the danger of the people that are in this list. I think he is the danger of being dropped into a bottom six role, just because the offensive creativity isn't as great as it was when he was younger. So he needs to just find that groove. But I have real confidence in him. I've never really caught a bad viewing of him. I think there's just more to give with Mathis Preston. I think the upside is top 10 in my opinion, which is why I have him at 10. And then the 11th here, JP Hurlburt. I had him a little bit higher earlier in the year. This year, I think adjusting from playing in Texas at the U16 level and playing for the Dallas Stars youth program, coming into the development program, I think the jump was a little bigger, I think, than he expected. He's come in and he really struggled to start the year. There was some, 10-game stretches where he didn't have a point. But when he found his game, he found his game. And now he's finding himself, in these more developmental situations and being able to become more impactful. Now he's at 25 points in 45 games. Scoring, obviously that's going to be his bread and butter. If he can score, he's going to be a really impressive player. If he can't score, you're going to want him to be more well-rounded. That's what he's working on in his game at the development program. The scoring, when it's there, he's a very good player. When he's not doing anything, he's not there. He's basically invisible. I look at him very similarly to Ryan Rubrick. The typical scorer that does really well at the youth level, needing to find his game. I think developmentally, he's definitely behind Rubrick. Rubrick this year had a really, like I said, he's really jumped off the radar this year and has shown that he can produce at the OHL level. Where I think Hurlburt's still trying to find his game in the development program and at the USHL level. And there's a clear gap between the two, which is why they're gapped in my ranking. But I like them both. I think they're both very good players. They're both very sound and responsible players. But we'll see what happens within their games and what kind of develops out of those players as well. But you got to give these kids a year to really kind of grow and develop within their own games as well. A kid who's really shot up the radar, I think he's been my biggest riser out of this group, is Cooper Williams. Didn't know much about Cooper Williams before maybe like a year ago. But in watching his games, I think he's just awesome to watch, man. He's just very impactful. Always gives a lot of effort. I think his work ethic within those in this class, I think, is in the higher end. This is a kid who's definitely he'll play in either the top six or bottom six, depending on his upside, but you're never going to question how much effort or willpower he puts into a game. Just finds his grooves and finds his opportunities and really takes advantage, which is why he's done so well in the Western Hockey League. I think he's got a very pro-centric game, playing for a program in Saskatoon that obviously has developed a lot of different players over the years. He's going to be a very interesting player to watch in comparison to the rest of his colleagues. I think he's already done a lot to really prove himself in this class. And I think next year is going to be a year where he might be able to find himself really getting into the core of this group here. I already have him here at 12. Is the top 10 out of reach for somebody like Cooper Williams? I don't think so. It just depends on his upside, what he's able to bring to the table, and how he's able to play. going forward in the Western Hockey League. And then going into here in the 13, we haven't really had a high-end Quebec and Maritimes Junior Hockey League prospect, at least in the last few years. But Dylan Rosie, I've had him on my radar now for a couple of years. He's been really amazing at the Quebec level. His thought to go to the USHL a couple times, and obviously now playing for the Quebec League in St. John. Off here, I got the stats off here to the right, but 29 points in 49 games here for Dylan. His brother decided to go to the USHL level, get some more opportunities in his game, but obviously Dylan's a guy who's a very high-end player, probably deserved to play in the QMJHL already. To me, next year is the year where he can really pop off and really show that Quebec League can still produce really elite prospects. I would expect him to be over a point per game next year. The thing you like with Dylan is he's a really good straight line skater, very good at battling in the corners as well. I think he's a little bit slight sometimes. I don't think he's as strong as he should be, but he's going to work on that. He's listed on Elite Prospects at 152. I would assume he's probably closer to 165, 170. Obviously you want him to be probably closer to 180. If not 185, just for when he's ready to be a pro level prospect and player. Dylan could be one of those guys that benefits from the modern development system now, where guys are coming from these major junior hockey leagues and jumping into the NCAA. I could see a guy like Dylan playing and having that long-term development track. I think his game would ultimately develop from playing in those environments and playing in games like that. He might play a couple years in the QMJHL and decide when he's 18, 19 that he wants to jump to the NCAA and find himself in a more rigorous and development environment. I think it suits him really well. I think he's a perfect candidate for the modern development system and how things have changed in the last year. He really fits that overall scheme, and I think he's somebody who, with roundedness and really good development and targeted training in certain aspects, I think he could be a really, really gifted player. And then 14 here, Chase Harrington, another kid from Spokane, teammate of Mathis Preston. I have him a little bit lower than Mathis, but there's games where I see him and I just love his game. I think he's somebody who is a really big, lanky guy, good hands and tight. I think he's a really good skater. Could stand to be a little bit more physical in my opinion, but he brings a really good, gifted offensive game. That's the key with a lot of these guys, at least in this class. I think the strength in the class is those that can score and play make. Obviously, you look at the defensive core here. I think, Keaton Verhoff, I think, is the one for me that it really stands out. But there's some other guys who I'm not going to mention in today's video, but, I think there are other guys that, could find themselves slipping into this top 20 of the class and being able to really, impact. And, obviously, depending on team need, that's going to shoot different people in different directions over the next year and change. So, but with Chase, he's just a really gifted, good player. I think he's one of the best players in this group that I'm talking about now in terms of scoring in the tight areas. He's able to be really, offensively demonstrative. I think he brings a lot of, vigor and different things. He's not necessarily physical. He's just really good at finding opportunities and spaces where you wouldn't normally find them. Then we got another player here where the Czechs have lacked in terms of lagging in high-end prospects. I think Filip Novak, to me, is the pride of Czech development right now. A lot of people like to look at guys like Dominik Buitris and, a couple of the other defensemen that have played already at the U18 level. But none of them have impressed me like Filip Novak has. And I think I've caught like one viewing of him, but the viewing I got of him was really impressive. He just goes about his game really, really responsible. His forechecking is very impressive for a kid that's as young as he is. Obviously, he's found his game now. He's playing at the U20 level and playing really well. You usually don't see kids, that impressive at that young of an age. Depends on who you're watching and who they're playing. But, Sparta Praha is obviously a pretty well thought of program in the Czech Republic, and then being able to play their U20 roster and be as impactful as he has. He's in the right development spot for himself. Could he get some pro games next year? I would assume he would as a draft eligible. I think his game is of that ilk and of that ability. And finding the grooves and the opportunities that he can, he's going to be able to really measure and maintain, his development path and what he's able to do from his strengths. I think his playmaking is a little bit more impressive than the scoring is, but if he can continue to develop a shot and develop more of the elusiveness that he could use in his game, I think he will find himself in the high end of this class. And then the last guy I'm going to mention here is Viktor Fyodorov, or I guess it's Fedorov if you translate it. He's playing at the NHL level. This is a kid with incredibly high-end hockey sense. I think his floor is the highest out of the group that's in here, which is why I have him ranked here. Victor's got an opportunity, I think, without the Russian bias, and without the spear of seeing what these Russian kids are enduring. This kid would be a top 10 pick, I think, in a lot of people's eyes right now. But unfortunately, just because, it's hard to get viewings live in Russia, as well as, people not really giving the NHL the credit that it maybe deserves, I think has led to a lot of different perceptions and opinions on players from Russia. But this is a kid who, I think he's one of their best 08s, and they have an incredible 2008 class, with guys that a lot of them are featured in my top 40 here that I won't share today, but might get into maybe closer to next year and maybe in the summer. Once they get a little more games in, and I can talk more about, their overall seasons as opposed to just some partial seasons. But this is a kid who, again, a really smart player, very good in terms of his overall work ethic and his mindset. Offensively, a very gifted player, obviously to score at the NHL level at 16 years old. You're expecting him next year to probably be closer to a point per game, which, looking at the likes of Demidov and Michkov is not that far off from them. So you would have to think he's going to find himself here more than likely in the top 10, if not closer to the top 5, just based on what he's been able to produce and what he's brought to the game here. So going into now the 2027, I'm going to stop my screen here and then go to 2027 and talk about the 2027 draft here. So we look at different guys here. Obviously, the cream of the crop here is Landon DuPont. Best defenseman I've ever seen under the age of 16. And I've watched Dahlin, I've watched, Makar, I've watched Gerard, like all these guys that caught viewings over their draft years. And Landon is just by far and away, I think, the next superstar defenseman in the National Hockey League. He will not lose this spot at 1 unless he just somehow has a major injury or has something wrong. But, I could talk about this kid for a whole 40 minutes, but I'm not going to. The biggest thing is he's just a rover-style defenseman. I looked at Cale Makar with his edge work. I think his edge work is right there with Cale, even right now. In terms of same ages, number one defenseman through and through, really good with his stick, awesome breakout potential with him as well. Great first pass, really good on the power play, shifty as all heck, great shot, scores a lot of goals, over a point per game already in the Western Hockey League, is the youngest player in the Western Hockey League. Just everything fits for this kid. He's going to get some. I would hope that he makes the U18 team for Canada this year. It would be stupid not to put him on that roster. I even think there's a legit shot for him to be at the World Juniors next year. It seems like you would want him there. I think he would be one of the best 6 defensemen in Canada, just based on his overall skill set and his game. I think there's just a ton to like with his game. I have not seen a weakness in him, and I've caught viewings now for 2 years. So should really be the number 1 far and away in this class. But I'll talk a lot more about him on a different day. I don't want to wax poetic about one guy. We're supposed to give a lot more guys credit here. Alexis Joseph, 6'4" and 200 pounds, 15 years old. Really good player. This is a kid who he's not applying for exceptional status. There was rumors whether or not he would or wouldn't. He decided not to. I think that's the right move for him. I don't see him as somebody who should have applied. Despite the fact he's a really dominant player at the U18 level for Quebec, and I have plans to get a lot more viewings of him in the near future. But he just brings it. He just brings it, and he, is very demonstrative, and, he will be a bigger player. I think you look at a guy like Ethan Belchet's in 26. This is the version of him in 27, in my opinion. I think, could he get to 6'6", 6'7"? It's possible. I don't know genetically whether or not that's the case. I don't claim to know his family or anything like that, but should he ever get to that size, I mean, you're talking about a really high-end player here that is already shown that he's been very high-end amongst his age group. So there's just a lot to really like with Alexis Joseph. He'll definitely be the next star in the Quebec Major Junior League. And, he'll be one of those guys that, he's worth the price of admission and then some. Just the Quebec League is going to be obviously salivating for him to be the number 1 overall pick for this year's draft for the QMJHL. Rocco Pelosi, this kid is by far and away the best 09 out of this group. The 09 class, I think, is honestly really strong for the U.S. Comparison to the 08 and the 07s, I expect a lot more of the 07s. I think developmentally they've lagged in a lot of ways. Going into what Rocco's been able to do, I mean, 170 points at the U16 level or the U15 level. Far and away will probably be the best player going into the development program. I expect high-end performance. I'm looking at him to get somebody like a Jack Hughes level production. Another guy who I think he scored a lot at youth levels because he's very advanced in his IQ and how he perceives the game. Now the skill set has to come now with that development program. I'm not expecting super elite numbers out of him at the development program, but I think he could really be a point per game player, at least in his U17 year. That's I think the bare minimum he should expect. I don't expect, if he gets 110 or 120 points in, the development program in any particular year, I think you're looking at this kid as a potential star. I just don't know that he'll be in that tier. So we'll see how his game develops, but a really high-end player, no questions asked. Jackson Jacobson, a late-born 08, one of the younger kids in the Western Hockey League, as well as Landon DuPont, has had the opportunity to play 2 years now at the Western Hockey League level. And, I mean, just what can I say about this kid? He's been super dominant. He's already a point per game at the Western Hockey League level. I had debates on whether or not I even want to put this kid at 2, which is why I have him with the class with Joseph and Pelosi. But another high-end player, his dad's an owner in the Western Hockey League, so obviously he got opportunities that maybe some prospects wouldn't have. But he's taken those opportunities and run with it, right? Like, he's just been a really impressive player in terms of, at 14 years old, he was already scoring goals in Western Hockey League. It just doesn't happen very often, even if you are late-born. He's come in and he's been really super solid. He's still got 2 more years in the Western Hockey League. I mean, imagine what he'll be in his draft-eligible year. There's the 27 high-end group right now is really showing out and been very impressive. I think you got 4 guys here that, honestly, looking at this year's draft, I think would be ranked higher than Higgins and Misa and these guys. Like, they've shown a lot in terms of their game. So if they can continue to trend developmentally, I think this is a really high-end group of kids at the top 4. And then at number 5 here, we got Eli McCamey. He got exceptional status into the British Columbia Hockey League. They obviously separated from Hockey Canada, became kind of their own rogue junior environment. He's kind of the poster child of that development cycle. So far hasn't really been as impressive as you would like him to be in the British Columbia Hockey League for Penticton. Obviously, Penticton, the news came out this week that they're going to have a Western Hockey League team here going into next year. I would assume that the Penticton Vs are going to step in and probably be the team to function for Penticton at the Western Hockey League level. So we will see if he becomes that kind of player. Obviously, the Western Hockey League will probably want to have him in their draft, is my guess. I think he should presumptively be the number 1 overall pick in the Western Hockey League draft this year, but depending on how things work, maybe Penticton gets that number 1 overall pick, and they already have Eli McCamey, so they probably likely will have him as their pick. So we'll see what happens with that. And what kind of different things come out of that as well. Number 6 here, we got Zachary Horvat Edouard. This is another kid who I'm going to get more viewings of. I have a lot of Quebec Major Junior, Quebec U18 games I got to get caught up on. But when watching this kid, obviously the high-end offense is there. I think his skating still needs a little bit of work for his size. I think he's only 5'10" right now, but obviously he's only 15 years old. He's got room to grow. There's more to see out of his game and more to see in terms of his overall potential and what he brings to the table. But he's been super dominant at the youth levels. Somebody, again, the Quebec League is starving for elite prospects. I think the 27 class is going to really resurrect the Quebec Major Junior League in terms of what kind of players are going to come into that program and what kind of players are going to develop out of there. Should be really interesting to see where that goes from here. Kingston Harris, 7. Kingston is a guy who, again, I think it's been a little bit hidden from scouts because you're not, the GTHL doesn't publicize their stats. I think, those that are in the know obviously know a lot about him. I'm not going to claim to know a ton about him, but I know in what little bits I've seen of him, I see just this flashy, super offensive, gifted player. Obviously, highlight reels are highlight reels. You can't really get a full gauge on what he brings to the table, but production-wise, he's been really impressive too. At the World Selects Invitational, the Quebec the Quebec PB tournaments, these different youth tournaments, he's been really impressive. So I would expect him to be very high end, and I think he's a guy who's got real slip ability in terms of going higher or lower out of this rank. Nolan Fitzhenry, this is another kid. I think him and Pelosi, you could argue some days they fit within certain spots here. Nolan Fitzhenry has played at the Shattuck St. Mary group there. He's by far and away their best player at the U15 level. Has gone on to play at the U16s as well. Just a super gifted player. Him and another kid who I'm not going to mention today, but Jerry DiConsolo. They're just lighting it up for Shattuck and being probably one of the most elite youth scorers in the country. Should be really cool to see his overall game. But every place he's played in, he's been, almost 2 points a game, which is, there's one thing to be elite and be a point per game at every level you've ever played at. To be closer to 2 points per game at every level you've played at is pretty unheard of, especially with how talented each of these, the groups of these kids are in. So Nolan, I have a lot of time for Nolan. I haven't caught as many viewings as I would like of him, as well as the next guy I'm going to talk about, but everything production-wise has really shown that he should be a top 10 pick in this draft. Looking into Caden McGregor here, another kid, OHL bound kid. He's still got another year before he's even drafted, but with a guy like Caden McGregor, another guy who I look like Kingston Harris, both of them have been very dominant in the youth levels. Caden's been a little bit more exposed, I think, than Kingston has in terms of being in the OMHA and playing for the Ottawa Valley Titans. And, they publicize a little bit more what they do and what their stats are. And he's shown that he's been really dominant in his age group as well. So, I got a lot of time for guys like him and different things like that. And I think there's just a lot to like within Caden McGregor's game. And then some of these other kids here, I'm not going to get into super big detail in a lot of them, but I'll talk about them quickly. Timothy Kazda has played now at the USHL level for Chicago, drafted by them. He, again, has been a really high-end scorer at the U16 level, has been kind of their paramount prospect that has come out of the new Seacoast Performance Academy, the new academy that's out in the U.S. And, he's really been their staple prospect. So a really high-end player, has played now internationally as well, and is very impressive for Slovakia. I think he's been one of their higher-end prospects out of Slovakia for 27. I think, 27, 28, 29, there's going to be another golden generation here for the Slovakians. There's some really high-end players that I mentioned before on my channel that will be high-end players out of Slovakia. Another guy to look at is Oliver Tomastik, who is the 2029 draft eligible, who has been far and away unbelievable with Dominic Zelezny, who's another 2029 guy from the Czech Republic, who both of them have played together in international tournaments and have been record-breaking across the board. So both really high-end players to watch out for in the coming years. Another guy who's getting a lot of attention out of Germany is Max Pankin, playing at the U20 level already, had to get exceptional status to play at the U20 level in the DNL. A really high-end scorer. He's almost a point per game at the DNL level already as a 15-year-old, basically. I think he's a late born 09, if I remember correctly. Just super gifted player, like just unbelievable. Sorry, he's not late born. No, or he's a 09. My bad. Super good player, really impressive in terms of what he brings to the table and the different elements he brings in. Love to see where his game will grow. A lot of people that have viewed the U18s have already said that he's already well and above the 07s and the 08s of the class. Does that mean the World Juniors next year for him? I think it's definitely possible, especially now that they're staying up. At least if I remember correctly, I think they're staying up in the World Juniors. So finding that groove and that opportunity for him will be impressive. And I think there's some really high-end opportunities for him developmentally that will be coming in the near future. And he might even play in the World Junior A's, because the Germans always send a team there. I think, there's an opportunity for him there as well. Robert Snodines, he actually played in the World Juniors already. He's a late born 08, playing for an unbelievable program in Sac St. Mary, playing for their prep team. Has already been very impressive in terms of what he's been able to bring as an 08 born is just unbelievable. This is a kid who he's 6'6", 200 pounds already as a 15-year-old, really good skater. Played in the World Juniors this year. I think was a little bit above his water in terms of what he could bring from the 08 class, but the 08 class for the Latvians is record breaking. They're going to have multiple first rounders. Obviously in this class, Naudines, I think is the cream of the crop for the Latvians. But just a huge skater, a huge player, great skater, has a lot of real skill and development opportunities in front of him here. And I think looking at the frame, looking at the runway, the upside that he has, hard not to put this kid in your top 10. I would have to think if he can continue the track he's on, he's going to find himself probably even in the top 5 of this list. He's to me the biggest boomer bust kind of guy that is in this grouping. Ethan Sung, a little bit of a shorter guy. He's playing for Shattuck as well. Playing at the U16 level, teammates with Nolan Fitzhenry. This is a kid who's just all speed and skill, just really gifted player, really good skater, shifty. You're going to rely on him to be a really elusive player, get some, key opportunities in late minutes of games. Needs to grow a little bit, but just the skill set is undeniable. There's a lot to like there with him. Schaefer Gordon Carroll, an American playing. He's from Colorado, but he's playing in the Western Hockey League. Playing now for the Medicine Hat Tigers, teammates with Gavin McKenna. This kid who is another really high-end player, very good talent, brings a lot of skill and potential into his game, and it should be really interesting to see what he's able to do going in through the Western Hockey League, and maybe might be a kid who goes from Western Hockey League to NCAA. He's another guy who I look at that would really develop for the modern development cycle. He's got the opportunity, I think, to play in both leagues. I think he will play in both leagues. And, you're looking at him probably impacting the NHL at like 21, 22, which, looking now, it's probably close to like 2030 before he really even hits the NHL. But has been very good at the Western Hockey League level already as a young kid, and will find his groove. James Scantlebury is another kid who's, I think, the number 2 behind Joseph in the QMJHL draft. Came to North America, played for the Bishop Kearney Selects at the U15 level, has been one of the best U15s and U14s across the country. This is a kid really high in skill, very gifted player, great skater, explosive is what I would say is the best part of his game. He's just super fast and super gifted. It was just dominant as a youth kid in his group. He played on a last place team in his under 14 year and was triple in scoring compared to the rest of his team. So obviously this is a kid who can take it on his back and is a very good individual producer. I got a lot of time for James Scantlebury. And then one other kid here to mention is Aussie McIntyre, playing in Spokane as well. A lot of young players that are playing for Spokane. They're going to be a really good team here in a few years. This is a kid who played in the Alberta Junior Leagues, did really well, came to the Western Hockey League this year, and it's adjusted fairly decently. Still some growth in his game. Still needs to get a little bit bigger, but there's a lot to like within his game as well. All right, so went through a recap here. I got other prospects I could feature. If you guys want, I have, put your prospects you want me to talk about in the comments below. I'll do a quick little scouting report in the comments. Went a little bit longer than I thought I was going to today, so I apologize for that. But with that being said, if you guys want to leave any comments, feel free to leave them on the chat below. Please share any, with any prospect nerds you know of, any draft nerds you know of. Please share this channel with them. We'd love to have more people on the channel and watching and really being able to engage in the content. I've started streaming to Twitch. I think there's a couple people on Twitch as well that are watching, so thank you for watching. And without further ado, thank you so much for being able to engage with me on the content. Jens, I'll get to your comment probably after the stream. Thank you for commenting. Longtime commenter. Thanks for Jens for being on here. And without further ado, thanks again for being on here. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks. Bye.